I just wanted to make sure everybody understood, again, pre-app process with P&A and rehab scope of work is a very open communication process. So we are more than happy to guide you if needed, or if for some reason you do not see that those documents are needed for your waiver request, completely understand. We will make sure to reach out to you if additional supporting documentation is needed. So those were the main in the construction session questions that were brought up. I do have 2 questions that were brought up in my session that I will phone a friend on. And that is one regarding the emphasis of platform with pre-app submission. And 2 is, and let me make sure I'm getting this question correctly, is regarding the 5% construction hard costs when it comes to our minority women business enterprise engagement. And please feel free to correct me for those people who asked those questions if I did not state that correctly for you.
So for the 5%, this may be a question that we received in advance of the workshop. And it would be helpful if I pulled it up so I can answer it correctly. But no, you can't combine a ton of vendors to reach that 5% in hard costs. Does that make sense? Am I communicating that well? Mitch, Donna? That's not the intent for that section.
Right. So in other words, not 5 different vendors that would be hard construction cost vendors that would equal up to 5%. Right. I don't know if that helps or not, but.
Sherry, I didn't even hear your first question. Can you repeat that one?
Sure. So the emphasis question, there was a question of how soon emphasis would be up and running in order to submit waivers in the case of the pre-application submission.
I'm not sure if Christy's on the line. Mitch, I'm not sure what your deadline or goals have been with Christy related to this. And the format for waivers is simply a form that will be uploaded, correct? We're not building the waivers into the system just yet.
Right. Yeah, so there's going to still be pretty much all of the supplementary Excel documents that you would have normally had with the pre-app workbook. Oh, Christy says she can't unmute. So it's going to be pretty similar to that. Really, what's going to be an emphasis is that table of contents or checklist that was previously in the Excel workbook, where there you're going to check off, if there's any architectural waivers included, or, if a QD review is included. And then, so yes, the waiver form is going to look like what it normally would look like, and you would submit that in the emphasis portal along with the remaining Excel documents that you're submitting. And I hope that will be up and running by end of day on Friday, but that is my goal. So, and Christy's goal.
Thank you. I think that took care of the 2 phone a friend questions from construction. So I'm good.
We did get some construction questions in our meeting, and we told them that there were other smart people to ask, smarter than us. So.
Yeah, there was one about cost reasonableness. I'm not sure if he got his question over to you, Sherry.
Yes, so cost reasonableness, I did make sure to quote and use the same response that we gave everyone in our attendee discussion earlier. So with cost reasonableness, again, 2022 does not have cost limits. So it will be evaluated on cost reasonableness. And if for any reason we are seeing some high costs that are brought out through application submission, that is an instance in which underwriting and construction will definitely convene for discussion, and that is where Mitch was stating additional documents could be requested in order to support that high cost. Am I saying that right, Mitch?
Right. And I think we received a specific question. I can't remember. Basically, if they had a third-party report, if that would be helpful supporting documentation for higher costs, which I imagine that would be supporting documentation. That would be helpful for us, but.
And I will agree, especially on the construction side, because it will at least talk to being reasonable within the area, which is always something that we also take into consideration.
Sure, we got a similar question in our group that was kind of related to how do we evaluate cost limits if there are no cost limits? And we kind of answered it the same way with basically what we're looking for is a reasonableness test. And obviously we're looking for outliers as we're comparing deal to deal. The real issue is are there any significant outliers that we would need to kind of drill down with? But the reasonableness test kind of sort of was the general answer.
And I think I said this earlier when we first started talking about cost limits, or maybe I said this in the small group session. We typically already do some cost reasonableness review as part of feasibility or underwriting. We look at a typical range for total development cost per unit is $250,000 to $300,000. You know, that's not to say that if it was 300. More than $300,000 that we wouldn't accept it. But, you know, if it's far or a lot higher than $300,000 per unit for total development cost, really think about providing some extra comments or supporting documentation for that.
All right, well, without further ado, I think last one to go. I mentioned this in our small group session. Apologies due to back problems. Once I'm sitting and vertical for a while, I have to start moving around a lot to mitigate the pain. So I will have to switch positions every now and then, likely, such as right now. Cool. So in our small group session, so you already made I think the bulk of the responses to during Megan's recap. I think I saw the ambiguity because it was being brought up related to the stable communities in 2018 data. So can go back and confirm that QAP provision. How self-evident do we think it is, and then address it in Q&A appropriately. So I don't believe have anything additional on those matters. Oh, I was going to mention someone posed the question. I had to scroll up a while after getting booted out of this meeting to see it again. But the question was, has there been any update on the likelihood of the large economic development deal that was discussed last year? I don't think you addressed it, but if you haven't,
I have not addressed it. That deal did come in last year. But it's, as of now, I don't have anything on the radar for economic development for 2022. Not to say that it can't come up still, but as of now, there's nothing that I know of at this point.
Great. Thank you. So in our small group, we talked about primarily enriched property services, internet as it relates specifically to 4% scoring and preservation scoring, how its accessibility from the different set-asides. The 811 scoring, especially as it pertains to the option D, I'm hearing some feedback, so I will mute everyone real quick. Okay, should still hear me. So the 811 specifically as it pertains to the integrated supportive housing as it pertains to the D option that is about your past performance on 811. And then we talked about affordability loss risk form. So I'm going to start with the other three because there's discussion for the affordability loss risk. Basically walked through, had slides already for this, walked through that. This will be posted, so can touch briefly on that, but I don't know that I even got any questions as I recall from that. So that's maybe just your tutorial on the affordability risk loss form and how to approach it, which we also uploaded along with the other documents that are for public comment. Any of these documents for which there's some amount of DCA extra judgment involved to say how do we operationalize this policy that was signed by the governor, wanting to leave a public comment period for that. So open to discussion on that, but we do have a tutorial on the gist. For enriched property services, most common question is, do you need to have a partner? Are you signing up for a specific partner services provider for a specific set of services at your application? If you're doing the third-party option, everyone seems to be clear that if you're already course certified and you're agreeing to do that as the owner, that's self-evident. For the third-party option, we intentionally have separated out what this commitment looks like from specific services or a minimum cost for services, which is a deviation from the way the old enriched property services used to be structured under prior QAPs. This is because we don't know what service providers might be in your locality. We don't know, and the primary goal, reason for pivoting to cores is that it's about assessing resident needs on an ongoing basis and tailoring services to meet those needs. So it shouldn't be about, I agree to this specific set of classes that I'll hold, et cetera. It's about just committing, and further cores is, the program is growing. So we won't know for sure who is going to be the provider in your area, if anyone. So the key question, which we already anticipated posting in Q&A, is that if you do not need to have a partner already lined up. This subsection B option is just checking the box that you are agreeing. And further, you do not need to feel like you can't, based on your geography, you should not claim the points. No one based on geography should not be taking the points. The limitation is primarily related to, are you committed to this initiative, and especially from a financial financial cost standpoint. This is, we understand that not every application is going to be able to, the goal here is, we know that not every property can afford to do all the same things. Some of them and some teams can afford to fund reinvestment in the residents. And we think that's value worth capturing in the QAP. We don't know how the future may change with respect to how what your cash flow looks like, et cetera. So this is, it's at your own risk, at your own assessment. And from an underwriting perspective, the application, while there's not a minimum documentation for a specific thing set up, you'll be underwritten with, say, internet access in mind. The idea is you should, using 811 as an example, you can see now that we previously scored on agreement to take DCA 811 if it was available. And we now have an incentive in place. It's designed to make sure that we're getting maximum participation and cooperation with that program. That's the kind of thing that you should keep in mind with this, that it's not that we don't know for sure what the future holds, but you should rely on what did we put in writing? Do you feel like your property can afford it? And the compliance monitoring impact and willingness to have, I articulate all of this way better in the initial session, by the way. I can never say the same thing twice, because you recall what you said before, and then you try to mimic that, and as opposed to just saying what you're going for. But that is you should, the theme that kept coming up in our discussions around this was, we know not everyone's going to be able to do it. We understand that for many people, it's, you philosophically think all points should be available to all, or that's the idea. That is not our impression necessarily with this section. And we expect compliance monitoring to take you up on what you've committed to. And yes, there will be constraints in the future related to your cash flow, et cetera. Is there a third-party provider around? And of course, all that will be a part of the compliance monitoring decisions, but you should expect that you will be checked for compliance on this in the future. So that's for enriched property services. The same deal applies for internet access. Really, that's with a heavier emphasis, of course, with respect to, you have more information to draw on, separate from your application, to know whether, as far as existing costs for internet, whether you think that this is something that you can be signing up for. So consider that when you're indicating whether you will be committing to provide this. For the 811, well, first of all, there were lots of questions about those couple ones. So I'm not going to get everything. You have a recording of my thing. I am intentionally being a little more concise so we have time for questions. But does anyone have a question on those items? No. Okay. So for 811 scoring, we discussed that there's some were interpreting this to mean that the only way to get points for the 811 score and 811 cooperation, if you will, was if you already have a contract in place, if you've already got residents in the units, et cetera, and that's not the way it's structured. This is the same way that our compliance performance is scored, where you're starting with these points as a baseline, and then upon assessment of a need for corrections, you would be docked points. The assumption here, purely from an application standpoint, we are likely going to structure it such that by default, you have the 2 points in your application, and it's just, is there any issue that you need to correct in order to provide evidence with the application that you're back in line with compliance. And so this is not a systematic disadvantage for anyone. The purpose of this section is to have some kind of stick to ensure cooperation with 811 commitments. We don't expect, it's not the ideal scenario that this actually generates variation between applications. Ideally, we communicate shortfalls to indicate what you would need to provide with your application to demonstrate that you have corrected them, and then you just get the points back. And that's the last main point related to this that people were asking, will there be any DCA indication or communication about whether there's an issue? And the answer is yes. This is an innocent until proven guilty section. We will be communicating. We already have reached out to and had a discussion with our 811 team in the Housing Assistance Division. They will be coming back to us for any issues that they are having, and then we will be able to identify for anyone who's come in for their qualifications or just reaching out to owners. This is the issue we've identified. This is the corrective measures that would need to be taken, and so we would expect you to include in your application supporting documents or evidence indicating that you've taken actions along that. So you will have warning. It would not be a surprise during the competitive round. Again, the goal is not to result in point deductions. The goal is to maximize participation in the program. And to specifically, we understand that the management companies are primarily the ones that may be involved with some of the issues we're seeing. And so we're hoping something like this can close the loop, increase the communication between the owners who are facing our incentives and the management companies who are in a position to act on an increased clarification. As I understand it from our 811 team, there's been, even if it had some understandable learning curve, that we're getting a lot of increased participation and cooperation with management companies on how to make this work. So excited to see that and hoping that this just helps that move along further. Any questions on that one? All right. So the big picture on affordability loss risk, and this is one of those, again, what I'm talking about, the slides, that tutorial will be there, but also all the slides just encompasses what's in the form. But what this gets at, the intent here is, there are some housing finance agencies that will score on a more qualitative basis their applications than we have in the past. There's a difference between saying you'll get points if you are the only types of points qualifications are things that are very clear cut and can be established ahead of time. If you're 20 feet from the bus stop, you get 3 points, whatever it may be. As opposed to what we have found is there are some of the things that we would care about the most. A high priority for the agency is very difficult to write translate into specific thresholds that people can meet or not on a black and white basis. Specifically with respect to preservation, the idea of we would want to prioritize those that are at most risk of, say, in the way it's defined in the QAP, converting to market, or there being some increased rent burden so the residents are at risk. In the absence of this award, there's some risk to the residents of the property leaving the program. How we score on that, if we tried to do it in thresholds, specific thresholds, similar to how far away from a bus stop, it would be very difficult, not really workable. So the intent with this, and we did pilot this type strategy this past summer, and while it was cumbersome in its first go around, the basic idea, and this is a trimmed down version, did seem to work reasonably well. It's supposed to mimic the pitch that you would make when you're going to a local government area and saying, this is why this development is great for you, or when you say to us, this application should be a priority for DCA. It doesn't have a path in the QAP. But this here's on an open-ended basis. Just tell us your narrative, provide the evidence in response to the priorities we listed, why it should matter, to why this should be a high priority for us. In the absence of sections like this, any of those discussions about high priorities would happen entirely outside of the QAP process. So the intent is to take what would otherwise be, completely separate dialogue and build it in to this program. So the considerations, really the two criteria that are mentioned are the urgency of the preservation need, and that is primarily where you have just make your pitch. The definition there is in the absence of DCA award, what are the risk factors that give you evidence that residents are at risk of affordability loss and that impact to them, and whatever evidence you have to substantiate that, include it. That's the narrative portion of it. There are two other indicators that would be a part of that are built into the QAP already. Part of that urgency question has to do with what's the magnitude of a potential rent increase that residents would fix. The idea being here that if we're worried about two properties being lost, exiting out of the tax credit program, the risks are greater in a market area where the property has a significant rent advantage for the tax credit limits relative to market rents. We would be less concerned if you were in an area where tax credit rents and market rents are very close to each other. So for this one, you are welcome to provide a narrative to highlight anything you're salient from the market study. But for this one, we are primarily, and the form states as such, we will be looking at the market study to conduct this review. As we did with underserved this past summer, for some sections, you provided a narrative and new information. For other ones, the information that is the most robust about this is already included in the application. The last criteria associated with it is the local supply and demand gap for comparable affordable housing options. The idea here being it would, again, the extent to which losing a property from its affordability is a greater risk or not, depending on what the alternatives in the local market are for comparable affordable housing options. That also is addressed very thoroughly in the market study. So we plan to use that. And of course, if you want to highlight salient points from the market study and give us a high level why you think for that criterion, it should be a high priority for DCA, you are more than welcome to do so. All of that is in the form. I did a slower, deeper discussion of this in the small group that will be posted, but in a nutshell, you have one that is make your pitch on why it is an urgent preservation need. Every conference we go to that talks about preservation, that make sure that you're prioritizing those that are most at risk is it's a high priority to do so, and it's just difficult to translate that into specific policies. We're attempting to do that here. And for the other ones, it's really just about the market study primarily. So any questions on that? And if not, we have 15 minutes left. So we can just open up for questions on anything. I believe in the last in-person QAP workshop, we negotiated how much silence we'd let sit before we let everyone just have their time back. I guess could let the 14 minutes run because you're all at your computers anyway. You can do other things if need be and listen in. But I believe what we settled in on at the time was let's let 2 minutes pass. If nobody says anything in 2 minutes, we'll call it a day. So I'm watching. My clock says 1:46. Turning up, we'll go to close it if no one says anything by 1:49. We have the question, is there an updated DCA contact information on the website? Yes, on the housing tax credit homepage, there would be, it states the housing credit communications, I believe it's called. Share my screen, and we have, we continue to update that with more specific things as we get questions. And I did get one earlier today that we should add a contact for project concept changes specifically. But I can, as long as we're here, share my screen on the DCA website. All right, you have come to the DCA website. You go to Safe and Affordable Housing button. Under Rental Housing Development, Housing Tax Credit Program. And on here, Housing Tax Credit Program Communication. You can either sign up for our email list, or here's staff contact info. Thank you, Sandy, for pasting. All right. Hypothesize that most people prefer not restart the clock and call that something that came in before 1:49 to another 2.5 minutes. So thank you everybody for coming. This was very helpful for generating a lot of helping us understand where we need to prioritize guidance and offer clarity. So we will look forward to more communications and have a lovely day in the meantime. Thank you.